Keanu Reeves wasn't one to frequent fast food joints often, but there was something about this day that pulled him off his usual path. He had been on a quiet road trip, seeking solitude and reflection in the countryside. Driving his vintage motorcycle through a small suburban town, he felt the pangs of hunger set in. With no fancy restaurants in sight and a craving for something simple, he pulled into the parking lot of a McDonald's. The restaurant, nestled between a strip mall and a gas station, was bustling with activity. It was the weekend, and families with kids, teenagers on their lunch breaks, and locals stopping in for a quick bite filled the tables. Keanu parked his motorcycle near the entrance, the engine rumbling softly before falling silent. Dressed in a black leather jacket, a plain gray t-shirt, and faded jeans, he looked like any other traveler passing through. As he stepped inside, the warm scent of fries and burgers enveloped him. The bright fluorescent lights reflected off the colorful menu boards, and the faint chatter of conversations filled the air. Keanu approached the counter, scanning the menu above with a thoughtful expression. The cashier, a young man in his early 20s, did a double take but quickly composed himself, clearly recognizing the famous actor. "Hi there, what can I get for you?" the cashier asked, his voice betraying a hint of excitement. Keanu smiled warmly, his signature humble charm disarming any tension. "I'll take a Big Mac meal with a Coke, please." "Coming right up," the cashier replied, punching the order into the register. While waiting for his food, Keanu glanced around the restaurant. Families were laughing, children were running around, and groups of friends were engrossed in conversations. It was a lively, heartwarming scene, the kind of everyday moment that Keanu cherished despite his fame. In the corner of the restaurant, a young boy caught his eye. The boy, no older than 5, sat at a table with his family. He had curly blonde hair and wore a bright red t-shirt with a cartoon dinosaur on it. The boy's eyes were locked on Keanu, his small face a mixture of curiosity and awe. Every so often, he'd lean over and whisper something to his mother, who would glance at Keanu briefly before returning to her meal. Keanu chuckled softly to himself. He was used to being recognized, though it was always the kids' reactions that amused him the most. They seemed to view him not as a celebrity but as a character from one of their parents' favorite movies. He gave the boy a small wave, and the child's eyes lit up. "Order for Keanu," the cashier called out, placing a tray with the meal on the counter. Keanu grabbed his tray and found an empty seat near the window, a spot that allowed him to enjoy his meal while observing the lively environment around him. The boy's table wasn't far away, and Keanu could feel the child's gaze on him. Every now and then, the boy would peek over, as if building the courage to approach. A few minutes passed, and Keanu was halfway through his meal when the boy finally slid out of his chair, clutching a small toy car in his hand. His mother called after him, but the boy was determined. He walked up to Keanu's table, his little legs moving with a mix of excitement and hesitation. Keanu looked up and smiled, setting his burger down. "Hey there, buddy," he said, his voice gentle. "That's a cool car you've got there." The boy held up the toy, his small fingers clutching it tightly. "It's my favorite. It's a race car." Keanu nodded, leaning forward slightly. "I can see why. It looks really fast." "What's your name?" "Liam," the boy replied, his voice barely above a whisper. "Well, it's nice to meet you, Liam. I'm Keanu." The boy giggled. "I know. My dad watches your movies." Keanu laughed softly, charmed by the child's honesty. "That's cool. I hope he lets you watch some of them too, when you're old enough." Liam nodded vigorously. Then, as if suddenly remembering something important, he leaned in closer. His eyes darted around the restaurant before settling back on Keanu. He cupped his hand around his mouth and whispered something into Keanu's ear. Keanu's smile froze as the words registered. His face shifted ever so slightly, a subtle but noticeable change. The warmth in his expression was replaced by something more serious. Concern, perhaps even alarm. Liam stepped back, clutching his toy car and looking at Keanu expectantly. "You're gonna help, right?" he asked innocently. Keanu nodded slowly, his mind racing. "Yeah, Liam, don't worry. I'll take care of it." He ruffled the boy's hair gently and glanced over at Liam's mother, who was watching the interaction with a puzzled expression. "You're raising a very smart kid," Keanu said, his voice steady but lacking the casual tone he'd used earlier. The mother smiled, though she seemed unsure of what had transpired. "Thank you. He's always been observant." Keanu gave her a reassuring nod, then stood up, his tray forgotten. His casual demeanor was gone, replaced by a quiet intensity. He scanned the restaurant subtly, his eyes lingering on the bathroom area and the exits. Whatever Liam had told him, it was serious enough to make Keanu reevaluate the situation entirely. He walked up to the counter and gestured for the cashier. Leaning in, he spoke in a low voice. "I need to talk to your manager now." The cashier's eyes widened, but he quickly nodded and disappeared into the back. Moments later, the manager, a middle-aged woman with a no-nonsense attitude, emerged. "Is there a problem?" she asked, her brow furrowed. Keanu glanced toward Liam, who was now back at his table, playing with his toy car as if nothing had happened. Then he looked back at the manager, his voice firm but calm. "There might be. I need you to stay calm and trust me." The manager hesitated but nodded. "What do you need me to do?" Keanu pulled out his phone, his fingers moving quickly. "First, I'm calling 911. Keanu Reeves stood near the counter, phone in hand, his demeanor calm but his mind racing. The words Liam had whispered to him just moments earlier replayed in his head like a warning siren. "The bad man is hiding in the bathroom with a bag. He told me not to tell anyone." The gravity of the boy's statement hit Keanu like a ton of bricks. This wasn't a harmless prank or an overactive imagination. The child had been sincere, his wide, innocent eyes holding a kind of urgency that couldn't be ignored. Keanu had spent years navigating intense, high-pressure situations on film sets, but this felt different. It was real and it demanded immediate action. As the manager approached, Keanu leaned in and spoke in a low, measured tone, careful not to alarm the nearby customers. "Listen carefully," he said, locking eyes with her. "There's a potential threat in your restroom. I need you to stay calm, keep everyone safe, and act like nothing is wrong." The manager's face paled, but she nodded. "What kind of threat?" she whispered back, her voice trembling. Keanu glanced toward the restroom. A young boy noticed something suspicious, a man with a bag. "I don't know the specifics yet, but it's better to be safe." Without waiting for her reply, Keanu stepped back and dialed 911. His voice was steady and authoritative as he spoke to the operator. "Hi, this is Keanu Reeves. I'm at the McDonald's on Main Street in town name. A child here has reported seeing a suspicious man in the restroom with a bag. I can't confirm the details, but I believe it warrants immediate attention." The operator responded swiftly, assuring Keanu that officers were being dispatched to the location. Keanu thanked them and ended the call, his gaze shifting back to the bustling restaurant. Families were laughing, kids were running around, and life continued as if nothing was amiss. He knew he had to keep it that way for now. The manager, visibly shaken, returned to Keanu's side. "What should we do in the meantime?" she asked, her voice barely audible. "First, don't let anyone else enter the restroom," Keanu instructed. "Post someone by the door, but make it look casual. Second, don't alarm the customers. The last thing we need is panic." The manager nodded again and quickly motioned for a trusted employee, a tall, young man who looked like he could handle himself, to stand near the restroom door. The employee's relaxed stance belied the seriousness of his task, and he subtly blocked anyone from entering. Keanu then turned his attention back to Liam, who was now sitting at his table, happily playing with his toy car, as though he hadn't just delivered a potentially life-saving piece of information. Keanu approached the boy and knelt beside him, lowering his voice to a gentle murmur. "Liam," he said softly, "can you tell me a little more about the man you saw? What did he look like?" Liam paused, his small hands gripping the toy car tightly. "He was big," the boy said, his voice a whisper, "and he had a black bag. He told me not to tell anyone, but I thought you could help." Keanu placed a reassuring hand on the boy's shoulder. "You did the right thing, Liam. You're very brave." The boy's mother, who had been watching the interaction with growing concern, leaned in. "What's going on?" she asked, her voice laced with worry. Keanu hesitated for a moment, not wanting to frighten her unnecessarily. "Your son noticed something unusual," he said carefully. "I've already called the police, and they're on their way. Everything's going to be fine." The woman's face registered both fear and gratitude. "Thank you," she said quietly, pulling Liam closer to her. Minutes felt like hours as Keanu kept a watchful eye on the restroom and the front entrance. The tension in the air was almost palpable, though the other customers remained blissfully unaware of the unfolding situation. Every sound seemed amplified: the clatter of trays, the hum of conversation, the faint sizzle of fries in the kitchen. Then, just as the anxiety threatened to boil over, the sound of approaching sirens pierced the air. Keanu exhaled a silent breath of relief as the flashing lights of police cars came into view through the large glass windows. 2 uniformed officers entered the restaurant, their presence instantly commanding attention. Keanu stepped forward to greet them, quickly explaining the situation. He pointed toward the restroom, where the employee was still stationed, and relayed Liam's account of the suspicious man. The officers exchanged a glance, their expressions serious. "We'll handle it from here," one of them said, nodding to Keanu. Keanu watched as the officers approached the restroom cautiously, one of them drawing a firearm while the other prepared to open the door. The restaurant fell eerily silent as a few customers began to notice the commotion. A tense few moments passed before the officers emerged, escorting a disheveled man in his late 30s. He looked nervous, his eyes darting around the room as he clutched the strap of a black duffel bag slung over his shoulder. The officer holding the man's arm spoke firmly. "Sir, we're going to need you to come with us and answer some questions." As the man was led outside, Keanu felt a wave of relief wash over him. The situation wasn't fully resolved yet, but the immediate danger appeared to have been neutralized. The officers thanked Keanu for his quick thinking and reassured him that the man and his bag would be thoroughly investigated. One of them added, "You might have just prevented something terrible." Keanu nodded, but his focus was on Liam, who was watching the scene with wide eyes. Keanu walked back to the boys' table and knelt beside him again. "You're a hero, Liam," he said, his voice full of warmth. "You trusted your instincts, and because of you, everyone here is safe." Liam smiled shyly, his mother pulling him into a tight hug. As the officers and the suspicious man disappeared from view, the restaurant slowly returned to normal. People resumed their conversations, and the sounds of McDonald's came back to life. But for Keanu, Liam, and his family, it was a moment they wouldn't forget anytime soon. Keanu, ever the humble figure, stayed for a little while longer, making sure the family was okay and offering them words of encouragement. Before leaving, he turned to Liam one last time. "Stay brave, buddy," he said with a wink. "You've got a good head on your shoulders." Liam beamed, and Keanu walked out into the sunlight, ready to continue his journey, grateful for having been in the right place at the right time. Keanu Reeves stood just outside the McDonald's, leaning against the wall as the winter sun cast long shadows across the parking lot. Despite the cool breeze, a bead of sweat traced down his temple, betraying the composure he outwardly maintained. Inside the restaurant, life seemed to continue as usual, but Keanu could feel the underlying tension that lingered. Every second of the wait felt like an eternity. The officers who had escorted the man out earlier hadn't yet returned with any updates. The black duffel bag the man carried had been taken to their cruiser for inspection, leaving Keanu and everyone else in a limbo of uncertainty. The only comforting thought was that the immediate threat had been removed. Still, questions loomed large in Keanu's mind. Who was that man? What was in the bag? Could this have been something even more dangerous than we imagined? Inside the restaurant, Liam sat quietly with his mother, coloring on the back of a kid's menu. His toy car was forgotten, resting beside the fries he hadn't touched. Keanu could see the boy through the window, the bravery he had shown earlier still etched on his young face. The manager stepped outside to join Keanu. She carried a small paper bag with a complimentary coffee, a gesture of gratitude. "I don't know how to thank you," she said, handing him the cup. Keanu accepted it with a gracious nod. "No need to thank me. The real hero is Liam," he replied, his eyes drifting back toward the boy. He trusted his instincts and spoke up. "That's not easy for anyone, let alone a kid." The manager followed his gaze. "He did something most adults wouldn't have done," she said softly. "You know, when I first saw you today, I never imagined something like this would unfold." Keanu smiled faintly, taking a sip of the coffee. "Life's funny that way. You never know when a small decision, like stopping for lunch, can lead to something much bigger." Their conversation was interrupted by the sound of approaching footsteps. One of the officers, a stocky man with a no-nonsense demeanor, walked toward them. His face was stern, but there was a glimmer of reassurance in his eyes. "We've cleared the immediate area," the officer began, addressing both Keanu and the manager. "The man you reported has been detained. We're still investigating his intentions, but the contents of his bag raised some serious concerns." Keanu straightened, his brow furrowing. "What was in the bag?" The officer hesitated for a moment, as if weighing how much to reveal. "A dismantled firearm, several rounds of ammunition, and a notebook filled with what appear to be erratic scribblings. It's too early to determine if he intended harm, but it's clear he was up to no good." The manager gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. "Oh my God!" Keanu's expression hardened, though he remained calm. "Did he say anything to you?" The officer shook his head. "Not much, other than claiming he was just passing through. But the fact that he was hiding in the restroom suggests he was waiting for something, or someone." Keanu's mind raced. The situation had escalated far beyond what he initially anticipated. "And Liam," he said, his tone sharpening. "He's the one who saw the man. Has anyone checked with him again? He might have noticed something else." The officer nodded. "We'll speak to him and his mother shortly, but we didn't want to overwhelm them right away. That boy has already done more than most people would in his situation." Keanu took a moment to absorb the information. He looked back at the restaurant, watching as Liam's mother gently combed her fingers through the boy's curly blonde hair. The innocence of the scene was starkly contrasted by the gravity of what had almost occurred. "Thank you for acting quickly," the officer added, addressing Keanu directly. "You recognized the warning signs and got us involved before things could escalate. Not everyone would have done that." Keanu offered a humble nod. "I just did what anyone should do." The officer paused, then smiled faintly. "Not everyone is as observant or as calm under pressure as you. You've made a real difference today." Before the officer walked away, Keanu had one last question. "Do you think there could have been a bigger plan here? Or was he acting alone?" "We're not ruling anything out," the officer replied. "But rest assured we're taking this seriously. If he has ties to anything larger, we'll find out." Keanu remained outside for a while, quietly contemplating the events that had unfolded. His life had been filled with dramatic moments, on screen at least, but nothing could compare to the weight of real-life stakes. Knowing how close this small suburban town had come to a potential tragedy left a heavy feeling in his chest. Finally, he returned inside, where the atmosphere had settled. The staff was back to serving customers, though the earlier tension still lingered in the air. Keanu made his way to Liam's table, kneeling beside the boy once more. "Hey Liam," he said, his voice soft and warm. "The police said you helped them a lot. You were really brave today." Liam looked up from his coloring, his shy smile returning. "I just wanted to help," he said quietly. "And you did," Keanu assured him. "You helped everyone here. Because of you, the police were able to stop something bad from happening." Liam's mother chimed in, her voice thick with emotion. "I don't even know how to thank you for listening to him, for believing him. So many people might have brushed it off." Keanu shook his head. "No thanks needed. Liam is the real hero here. He trusted his instincts, and that's what matters most." Before leaving, Keanu pulled out a small notebook from his jacket pocket. He scribbled something down and handed it to Liam. "What's this?" the boy asked, curious. "It's my number," Keanu replied with a wink. "If you ever need anything, or if you just want to talk about cars, you can call me anytime." Liam beamed, clutching the piece of paper like a treasure. His mother wiped away a tear, overwhelmed by Keanu's kindness. As Keanu stepped out of the restaurant and onto his motorcycle, the sun had begun to dip below the horizon, casting a warm golden glow over the town. He put on his helmet, took one last look at the McDonald's, and smiled to himself. Some heroes wore capes, others wore leather jackets and rode motorcycles. And sometimes the smallest among us, like a 5-year-old boy with a toy car, reminded the world that courage could come in the most unexpected forms. As the plane began its descent, James fidgeted in his seat. The weight of his earlier behavior pressed on him like a lead blanket, making every passing second unbearable. He couldn't bring himself to look at Keanu again, though the actor remained as calm and composed as ever. The atmosphere in the first-class cabin buzzed with quiet awe as passengers whispered among themselves about the experience of flying with a Hollywood icon. When the plane finally touched down, James sighed in relief, hoping the ordeal was over. But what he didn't know was that the most humbling part of his day was yet to come. The passengers began gathering their belongings as the seatbelt sign turned off. Keanu stood up and stretched, his movements unassuming but somehow magnetic. Several people approached him, requesting photos or autographs, which he graciously obliged. James lingered near his seat, unsure of how to exit the situation without further embarrassing himself. As the passengers started to disembark, James overheard the flight attendant thanking Keanu profusely. "Mr. Reeves," she said, her voice warm with admiration, "it was truly an honor to have you on board. You've made this flight unforgettable." Keanu chuckled softly. "The honor was mine. You all worked so hard to make us comfortable." "Thank you." The contrast between Keanu's humility and James's earlier arrogance was glaring, and James felt a pang of regret twist in his chest. He followed the line of passengers toward the jet bridge, keeping his head low. Upon entering the terminal, James perked up slightly. He had arranged for a private car to pick him up, one of the perks of his self-proclaimed elite lifestyle. As he walked briskly toward the luxury lounge, he couldn't resist a glance over his shoulder at Keanu, who was calmly walking with a small carry-on bag, chatting with the elderly woman he had helped earlier. They looked like old friends, their conversation punctuated by soft laughter. James snorted quietly. "Even when he's not trying, the guy makes me look bad." Inside the lounge, James made a show of ordering an expensive espresso and positioning himself in the most visible spot, hoping to reclaim some sense of superiority. He scrolled through his phone, pretending to ignore the occasional glances from other travelers. A few moments later, Keanu entered the lounge, drawing everyone's attention without trying. Unlike James, he didn't seek the best seat or make a spectacle of himself. Instead, he found a quiet corner, where he pulled out a book and began reading. A steady stream of admirers approached him, but he treated each one with patience and kindness. James couldn't take it anymore. He slammed his phone down on the table and muttered under his breath. Just as James was about to leave the lounge and retreat to his car, a well-dressed man in a tailored suit approached Keanu. The man's demeanor was professional but deeply respectful, and James immediately sensed this wasn't a typical fan interaction. "Mr. Reeves," the man said, extending his hand, "I hope you enjoyed the flight. Everything has been arranged as per your instructions." Keanu smiled and shook the man's hand. "Thank you, Marcus. I appreciate your help." The brief exchange caught James's attention, and he couldn't resist eavesdropping. The suited man continued, "The team is ready to meet with you at the charity gala this evening. The venue is prepared, and your donation has already made headlines." James's ears perked up. "Charity gala? Donation?" The man added, "And the restaurant staff has been informed of your visit tomorrow. They're thrilled to host you again." At this, James couldn't help but interject. "Wait, what restaurant are you talking about?" he blurted out before he could stop himself. Keanu turned to him, his expression as calm and unbothered as ever. "Oh, just a place I frequent when I'm in town," he said simply. Marcus, the suited man, raised an eyebrow at James but didn't elaborate. James's curiosity burned, but he didn't want to embarrass himself further by pressing the issue. As Keanu prepared to leave the lounge, the elderly woman he had helped earlier approached him one last time. She clasped his hand in hers, tears glistening in her eyes. "Thank you again, young man," she said. "People like you give me hope in this world." Keanu smiled gently. "It was nothing, ma'am. Safe travels." The entire exchange was so genuine, so heartfelt, that James felt a lump rise in his throat. He realized, with painful clarity, that he had spent the entire flight and lounge experience trying to prove his worth through materialism and status, while Keanu had quietly earned the respect and admiration of everyone around him simply by being kind. As Keanu exited the lounge, James followed at a distance, his curiosity about the restaurant still gnawing at him. When they reached the terminal's private car pickup area, James's jaw dropped. A sleek black SUV was waiting for Keanu, and the driver greeted him with a deferential nod. The suited man, Marcus, opened the door for Keanu and said, "The restaurant staff will be thrilled to see you again, sir. After all, it's not every day they get to host their owner." James froze, the words echoing in his mind. Their owner? Suddenly, it all clicked. Keanu didn't just frequent the restaurant, he owned it. And not just any restaurant. James recognized the name Marcus had mentioned earlier. It was one of the most exclusive establishments in the city, a place James had tried and failed to secure a reservation at for months. Keanu, sensing James's astonishment, glanced back at him before stepping into the car. He gave James a small, knowing smile. "Take care," he said simply, before the door closed behind him. As the SUV pulled away, James stood there, stunned. The man he had insulted and underestimated turned out to be not only a globally beloved actor, but also a philanthropic business owner and a paragon of humility. For the first time in years, James felt truly small. Not because of his lack of fame or wealth compared to Keanu, but because of his own lack of character. He resolved, then and there, to reevaluate his priorities and learn from the example Keanu had set. Later that evening, as James sat alone in his penthouse suite, he couldn't stop replaying the day's events in his mind. He realized that true greatness isn't about flaunting what you have. It's about how you treat others, regardless of their status or background. From that day forward, James made a conscious effort to be kinder, more respectful, and less judgmental. Though he knew he'd never be Keanu Reeves, he hoped he could at least become a better version of himself. If you enjoyed this tale and learned something valuable, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to our channel for more stories that inspire and entertain. Together, we can spread positivity and make the world a better place. One story at a time.